The archive is in the sub-basement of a county building off Roosevelt Road, and in September 2020, I was the only person allowed down there. COVID had emptied the offices upstairs, my supervisor was working from home, and my job was to finish digitizing forensic psychiatry files from the 80s and 90s before the department moved to a new system, 6 days a week. Fluorescent lights that clicked on one row at a time when you walked. A dehumidifier in the corner that ran nonstop because the walls sweated even in fall. I liked it, honestly. Nobody bothered me. I brought lunch in a plastic container and ate it at my desk while flipping through case files that were older than I was. The file was in a batch marked 1994. Beige folder, county issue, the kind with the string tie on the flap. The label said only a patient number, initials, and the entry date. No name on the tab. That wasn't unusual. A lot of the older files had the identifying pages tucked inside instead of on the cover because the archivists back then were paranoid about people reading tabs when they walked past a cart. I opened it because I had to. Every file had to be scanned, indexed, and cross-referenced against the master roll. That was the job. The intake sheet was normal at first. Male, 31 at admission, transferred from a state hospital downstate after what the paperwork called an escalating pattern of unsolicited disclosures to staff and other patients. That phrase caught me because it was the kind of language people use when they don't want to write down what actually happened. Underneath, in a different pen, someone had added, "Patient states he knows when people around him will die." I read that line and I laughed a little. Not because it was funny, because that's what you do in a basement by yourself when something weird lands in your lap. You laugh and you keep going. The clinical notes were where it got specific. First entry, June 1994. The patient, I'll call him Warren, that was his first name, told a night nurse that a man in the bed across from a guy named Terrence, wouldn't be there by Friday. The nurse wrote it down as delusional ideation and flagged it for the morning team. Terrence had a heart event on Thursday night and was pronounced at 4:11 Friday. The nurse's follow-up note was 3 lines long and ended with, "Recommend continued observation." Second entry, 3 weeks later. Warren told a different nurse that a patient named Rudy had until Tuesday. Rudy was moved to medical on Monday for pneumonia complications and died Tuesday afternoon. That note was longer. Somebody had underlined the date twice in red pen. I stopped reading. I got up, walked over to the coffee maker in the break room down the hall, poured a cup I didn't want, and stood there for a minute listening to the dehumidifier through the wall. Then I went back. The notes kept going. Not every week, not every month, but it kept happening. A man named Douglas, 4 days out. A patient logged only as JP because his file had been sealed at some later point, 6 days out. An orderly who wasn't even a patient. A guy called Bishop who took a smoke break with Warren during yard time, 9 days out. Bishop had a stroke on day 9. Someone on the treatment team had started keeping a private tally on lined paper, folded into the back of the file. I could tell it was private because it wasn't on letterhead and the handwriting was rushed. A column of first names, a column of predicted dates, a column of actual dates. The 2 date columns matched, every time. By late 1995, the tally was up to 15. By spring 1996, it was 17. The clinical notes around that period had gotten thinner and more careful, the way notes get when a facility is starting to worry about liability. Nobody wrote, "He was right again." They wrote things like, "Patient continues to make statements consistent with previously documented ideation," and left it at that. The 18th was a woman on the ward named Colette. Warren said her name out loud during a group session and gave a date 11 days out. She was found unresponsive in the shower room on day 11. The note said, "Cardiac." There was a photocopy of the death certificate stapled behind the entry, which was itself unusual because death certificates don't normally live inside psychiatric files. Someone had wanted proof. I sat with that for a while. I remember the sound of my own breathing more than anything else. The dehumidifier, the ballast hum of the lights, and me, breathing through my nose the way you do when you're trying not to think too hard about what's on the page in front of you. Then I turned to the next entry. It was dated the second week of July 1996. It was written by the attending, a man whose signature I'd been seeing at the bottom of every note for 2 years. First name Howard. The entry was short. It said Warren had asked to speak with him privately after group. Warren had told him, quote, "It's going to be you, 16 days. The attending had written the sentence out in full and put it in quotation marks. Underneath, in a steadier hand, he wrote, "Documented per protocol. No clinical action indicated." 16 days later, there was no more handwriting from Howard in the file. The next note was from a different doctor, a woman whose signature I didn't recognize. It said the attending had passed suddenly at home, aneurysm. She wrote that she would be assuming Warren's care effective immediately, and that his affect was, quote, "flat, non-responsive to verbal prompts." He never spoke again after that. Not to that doctor, not to the next one, not to any of the ones after. I flipped through the rest of the folder faster than I should have. Annual reviews, medication charts, transfer requests that got denied. Every year, the same summary language. Patient remains mute, no verbal output, cooperates with basic care, no further predictive statements have been documented. 2 decades of the same paragraph, copy-pasted forward with only the dates changing. The last entry in the file was from March of 2020, right before the world shut down. Warren was 57, still on the same ward, still silent. The reviewing physician had written, "No change, continue current placement." I closed the folder, I put it back on the cart. I finished the rest of my batch, ate the rest of my lunch, even though I wasn't hungry, and clocked out at 5. On the train home, I kept thinking about the tally sheet in the back, first names in a column, simple as a grocery list. The next morning, I went back down, and I pulled it again. I don't know why. That's not true, I know why. I wanted the tally to be wrong. I wanted to find one name where the dates didn't line up, one place where somebody on the treatment team had gotten sloppy, so I could put the file back and stop thinking about it. Our building shares a floor with the county library's periodicals archive, newspapers on microfilm going back to the 1930s, obituaries indexed by year. I signed in, sat down at one of the readers, and pulled the reels for 94 through 96. I found Terrence first. Same first name, same age range, same date. 2-line obituary in the Sun-Times. Then Rudy. Harder to find because the name was common, but the date matched a listing out of a Southside funeral home. Then Douglas. Then Bishop, the orderly, whose obituary mentioned he was survived by a daughter in Rockford. Then Colette. Then 2 more from later in the tally. 7 names, 7 matches. I hadn't been looking for that many. I'd told myself I would check 3 and stop. I stopped at 7 anyway. I turned off the reader, rewound the reel, put it back in its box, and went upstairs to my desk. I didn't check Howard. I could have. His obituary would have been the easiest of all of them to find. Chicago doctor, died young, aneurysm at home. It would have been in the Tribune, probably with a photo. I didn't pull that reel. I sat at my desk for a while. Then I opened the database, entered the file into the system with the standard code for completed intake, marked it as processed, and moved it into the finished pile. I never went back to that folder. I finished the 94 batch, moved on to 95, worked through the rest of the decade over the following months. When my supervisor finally came back into the office in the spring, I didn't mention the file. There wasn't a reason to. It was cataloged, it was done. That was my job. Warren is still there, as far as I know. Same ward, same bed, probably. He hasn't said a word since the summer of '96, which is longer than I've been alive. Sometimes at night, I think about what it would be like to know a thing like that, about the person sitting across from you at breakfast, and then to have to eat your breakfast anyway. And then I think about what it would be like to know it about yourself, and to decide the safest thing you can do for everyone in the room is to never open your mouth again. I don't know if he's protecting them or protecting himself. I don't want to know. The folder is on a shelf in the sub-basement, 3rd row from the back, 2nd cabinet from the wall. I could tell you the exact number if you asked me. I remember it the way you remember an address you lived at as a kid. I just don't go down that aisle anymore. The water in Chalmette was the color of weak coffee, and it smelled like a gas station bathroom. That's the first thing I remember, not the destruction, the smell. I was contracted out to one of the bigger insurance carriers after Ida came through. My job wasn't rescue, it wasn't cleanup. I walked the flooded streets in waders and a life vest, took photos, marked properties, made notes for adjusters who would come later in dry boots. The parishes were still torn up 2 weeks in, whole blocks without power. National Guard trucks parked at the end of streets that used to have driveways. It was 91 that afternoon. The humidity was worse than the flood. That morning I was working a stretch off Judge Perez, small ranch houses built in the 60s, most of them mold black up to the roofline. My checklist had 32 addresses. I got through 11 before I found them. The house sat back from the road behind a chain-link fence that had gone underwater and was showing again as the water dropped, all bent over from whatever had floated into it. Beige siding, a wooden porch with a wheelchair ramp. The front door was open, which wasn't unusual. A lot of people had left doors open on their way out, either from panic or because the pressure of the water had done it for them. I called out from the yard, standard thing you do. Half the time you're checking if pets got left behind, half the time you're just being human about it. I didn't expect a response. A woman answered, "We're in here." Her voice was calm, level, like she was telling me she was in the kitchen and would be right out. I waded up the ramp. Water inside the house was maybe 40 inches deep, which is a lot when you're a person and not a number on a form. It was black. You couldn't see your own knees. The living room furniture was floating in a slow, lazy drift, a couch cushion turning like a compass needle in the corner. A framed picture had come off the wall and was face down in the water. 3 people were sitting in the middle of the room, not sitting, standing, but so still it looked like sitting. A woman in her 60s, hair pinned up, wearing a housecoat that was soaked from the waist down. A man maybe 30, 32, with a thick beard and a Saints t-shirt. A woman a little younger, maybe late 20s, holding a canvas tote bag up out of the water with both hands. All 3 of them turned to look at me at the same time, which was somehow the part that got me first, like they'd been practicing. "Ma'am," I said, "you folks need to come out." The older woman smiled, small, polite smile. "We're all right, sir, thank you." I said what you're supposed to say, that the water was contaminated, that there was fuel in it, and sewage, and fire ants sometimes riding on top in these mats you didn't see until you were already in them. That there were more storms coming, that she and her kids needed to be at the evacuation point in Moreau, which had cots and hot food and a nurse on staff. She listened. She nodded in the right places. The son and daughter didn't say anything at all, just stood there with the water up around their belts, looking at me the way you look at a mailman. When I was done, she said it. "We can't. The house is holding us." I thought I misheard her. I said, "Ma'am?" "The house is holding us," she said again. Same tone. Not sad, not scared, not anything. Like she was telling me the time. The son nodded once. The daughter nodded once. I stood there in that black water. Something bumped my calf under the surface, and I didn't look down. A refrigerator was on its side in the kitchen doorway. The window over the sink was cracked in a spiderweb pattern. The wallpaper had bubbled and was peeling in long strips near the ceiling. I could hear a smoke alarm going off somewhere in the neighborhood, that chirp they do when the battery's giving up. It had probably been chirping for a week. Somewhere further off, a dog was barking, not at anything, just barking. "Ma'am, when you say the house is holding you, do you mean like physically?" "No, sir." "Do you mean the doors are jammed? Because I can help you with that." "No, sir, thank you." The son shifted his weight. His t-shirt was riding up in the water, and he pushed it back down without looking. I noticed his hands were shaking, just a little, but his face wasn't. I want to be honest here. My first thought was drugs. My second thought was carbon monoxide, even though nothing was running. My third thought was that they were in shock, the real kind, where people freeze up and drown in 3 feet of water because their brain has just decided that's how it goes now. I asked if anyone was hurt. She said no. I asked when they'd last eaten. She said they'd had crackers that morning and some peaches from a can. I asked where their go bag was. She pointed at the tote bag her daughter was holding. It looked like it had maybe 2 shirts in it. "How long have you been standing in this water?" I asked. She thought about it. Actually thought. "Since Sunday, I believe." It was Thursday. I keyed my radio and stepped back out onto the porch to call it in. I told dispatch I had 3 refusals at the address: ambulatory, non-combative, requesting a boat. I gave them what I had. I did not tell them what she'd said about the house. I don't know why. Maybe I already knew nobody was going to write that part down. While I waited, I went back inside because I didn't want to leave them alone. I asked her name so I could put it on the form. She told me. I asked her kids' names. She told me those too. I'm not going to put them here. I asked her, careful, "Ma'am, is there someone we should call for you? Family somewhere?" "My sister's in Baton Rouge." "Okay, we can get you to her." "That'd be fine." She said it like I was offering her a ride home from church. The boat took maybe 40 minutes. Guardsmen, 2 of them, young, one of them chewing gum so hard I could hear it from the porch. They came in through the front door and did their thing. They were polite. They asked her to come, and she came. The son and daughter followed. Nobody argued. Nobody grabbed a door frame. The daughter carried her tote bag up above her head, like she was crossing a river, and I guess she was. One of the guardsmen tried to take the older woman's elbow at the doorway, and she moved his hand away, gently, and kept walking on her own. The older guardsman looked at me over the woman's head, and I could see him thinking the same thing I was thinking, which was, why did we need a boat for this? Then they walked out. But here's the thing I keep coming back to. They didn't leave any earlier. 4 days in that water, and I know for a fact people had come by. There were spray paint marks on the outside wall from a search team, an X with a date in it, Tuesday's date. Someone had already been to that door. Someone had already asked, and they had said no, and that team had moved on, because you can't drag a competent adult out of their own house. I'd just gotten lucky, or unlucky. I stayed long enough to hear the sentence. At the evacuation point in Moreau, I saw her again. She was sitting on a folding chair with a paper cup of coffee, dry clothes on, her hair still pinned up the same way. Her kids were across the room getting checked out by a nurse. She saw me and waved me over, and I went because I didn't know what else to do. She said, "I want to thank you." I told her she didn't need to thank me. She said, "My husband built that house in 1978. He did the framing himself and the porch and the ramp when I needed it after my surgery. He died in the front bedroom 3 years ago, in his sleep. We weren't going to leave him in there alone with the water coming up." She said it exactly like that, not crying, just telling me. "We knew we had to go," she said. "We just couldn't be the ones to do it." Then she said, "Do you understand?" And I said yes, because in that moment I did. I filled out the paperwork later that night in a motel in Slidell with the AC set too cold and the ice machine down the hall clunking every 20 minutes. Address, damage estimate, water line, structural notes. There's a field on the form called Reason for Delayed Evacuation. It's a drop-down, mostly. Medical, pets, vehicle failure, refused assistance, other with a text field. I clicked other. In the text field I typed personal circumstances. I closed the laptop. I lay on top of the comforter with my boots still on. I thought about the son's hands shaking and his face not moving. I thought about the daughter with her tote bag over her head. I thought about that smoke alarm chirping somewhere out in the dark over all that water, and about a man in a front bedroom in 1978 hammering the frame of a house he was building for his wife, not knowing any of the rest of it. I did 17 more addresses the next day. None of them had anyone in them. I still work claims. I still get sent out after storms. And every time I call in from the yard, before I go inside, I stand there for a second longer than I need to, and I listen, not for anything in particular, just listening. Some houses are empty, some aren't. You can't always tell from the porch. The mall closed at 9 on weeknights. By 9:15, the last stragglers were usually out through the west doors by the food court. I did the sweep alone Sundays through Wednesdays. North Park, off County Line Road in Jackson. Not the fancy end of town, not the rough end either. A mall hanging on because people still needed a Dillard's and somewhere for teenagers to loiter. October 2022. I'd been on overnights about a year. 12 to 8, sometimes 10 to 6 if they were short. That night was a Tuesday. I remember because I was thinking about the game the next day and whether I could catch any of it before my shift. The routine was simple. After housekeeping finished around 10:30, I'd lock the tenant gates and walk the loop. Upper level first, then lower, then the back corridors behind the food court. Lights get cut to about 40% after 11, so you're walking through this yellow-brown half-dark, the polished floor throwing back long, stretched shadows, a sea humming steady. Sometimes a compressor in a closed shop kicks on, and it sounds like somebody dragging a chair across the floor 200 feet away. First week on the job, you jump at that. After a while, it's just noise. I made the upper loop without seeing anything. Near JCPenney, somebody had left a shopping bag on a bench. I checked it. Baby clothes and a receipt from that afternoon. I set it aside for lost and found. Not the first time somebody walked out and forgot a bag. Wouldn't be the last. Down the escalator, which they leave running on low speed, and into the atrium. The atrium was the middle of the mall, a big open space with a dry fountain in the center. They'd shut the fountain off maybe 2 years back, cost of maintenance. Now it was just a tiled bowl with a plastic sign that said, "Coming soon, renovation." Coming soon since 2020. That's where I saw her. She was on the bench that ran along the east side of the atrium, facing the fountain, sitting straight up, hands folded in her lap. Small woman, white hair pulled back, a cardigan that looked a size too big. One of those cloth handbags older women carry with the wooden handles. Her feet were flat on the floor together, like she was waiting for a bus. I stopped about 10 feet away. First thing I said was the thing you always say. "Ma'am, we're closed. Everyone needs to be out by 9. She didn't turn her head, didn't jump, didn't act surprised, just kept looking at the fountain like there was still water in it. I took a step closer. Sometimes older folks doze off in the mall, especially the ones who come in to walk laps in the morning. I thought maybe she'd fallen asleep sitting up and my voice hadn't quite reached her, so I said it again, softer. "Ma'am, mall's closed. Can I help you find your ride?" She blinked. Once, slow, then she said, "I heard you." That was it for a while. She heard me, and she wasn't going anywhere. I stood there feeling stupid, one hand on my radio, trying to decide what this was. First thought was dementia. I'd worked in a nursing home 8 months before this job. You learn the look, the blank patience, the way somebody sits for hours without seeming bored. I thought, okay, she's confused. Somebody's calling the police right now looking for her. I stepped around so I could see her from the front without standing over her. "Ma'am, I work here. Are you all right? Do you know where you are?" She looked at me then. Her eyes were fine, clear, not the fog I'd been expecting. She looked at me like a librarian looks at somebody who's asking a dumb question in a polite way. "I'm in the mall," she said. "In Jackson." "Yes, ma'am. I know where I am." "Okay, so not that." I nodded slow, still trying to figure it out. "Is somebody coming to pick you up?" She looked back at the fountain. "No." "Do you have a phone I can help you with? I can call someone." "No, thank you." Polite. Even. The way somebody turns down a second cup of coffee. I keyed my radio and asked dispatch if anybody had called about a missing person, older woman, 70s. Dispatch was a guy named Kurt, who covered 3 properties from an office by the interstate. He came back saying nothing on his end. I told him to hang tight. I sat down on the bench, not right next to her, about 1.5 feet away, angled so I could see her. "Ma'am, look, I don't want to make this into anything, but I've got to figure out how to get you home. It's late." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough I thought she wasn't going to answer at all. The AC clicked off somewhere above us, and the quiet after was the kind where you can hear the fluorescent lights. Then she said it, not to me really. Just out loud, the way you say something to yourself when you've been thinking it a while. "I have nowhere to go." She wasn't crying. Her voice didn't shake. She said it the way you'd say the forecast for tomorrow, or that the milk had gone bad, a fact she'd already sat with for a long time. I didn't say anything for a minute. I'd worked jobs where you deal with hard nights, a nursing home, and before that I bounced at a place off Highway 80. The worst thing you can do when somebody says something like that is jump in with a solution, or worse, a speech. So I just sat there. After a while I said, "You want to tell me about it?" She turned her handbag over in her lap, opened the clasp, closed it, opened it again, not looking for anything, her hands wanting something to do. "They put my things in the hall last Tuesday," she said. "The apartment on Bailey. I was there 22 years. 22 years. My husband and I moved in when they built it. He passed in 2016. The rent kept going up. I fell behind in the summer and I thought I could catch up in September, and I couldn't." She said all of this like she was reading off a piece of paper, no self-pity in it. If anything, she sounded a little annoyed at herself, the way somebody sounds when they've replayed a bad decision enough times that it's stopped hurting and become boring. "Where'd you go after?" I asked. "My friend Ruth has a spare room, off Terry Road. She's been kind." "That doesn't sound bad." "Her son moved in with her in August. He doesn't like me being there. He doesn't say so, but he doesn't have to." She closed the handbag. "I came here today because Ruth had her doctor and her son was home. I didn't want to sit in that room while he watched television and waited for me to leave. So, you came to the mall." "I came to the mall." "And you missed the closing announcement." She almost smiled, not quite. A small movement at the corner of her mouth. "I heard it." I looked at her. She looked at the empty fountain. "I thought if I sat here long enough somebody would tell me what to do," she said. "That's a foolish thing for a grown woman to think. I'll tell you the honest truth. Standard procedure would have been to call the city police non-emergency line and let them handle it. That's what the binder in the office says. Unaccompanied person after hours, not leaving on request, you call it in. 20 minutes and she'd have been somebody else's problem. I didn't do that. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just didn't want to sit there and watch a squad car pull up in front of the JCPenney doors and have 2 cops walk this woman out to the back of a cruiser like she'd done something. She hadn't done anything. She'd sat on a bench. I pulled my phone out and looked up the county aging services number. My aunt had used them for my grandmother. It rang twice and Denise picked up. I told her what I had. 70s, no immediate housing, safe and calm, sitting with me in the atrium on County Line. She asked a few questions. I handed the phone over. The lady beside me answered everything in that same even voice. Yes. No. 22 years. Ruth, Bailey Street, 78 in December. Denise said somebody would be there inside an hour. They came in about 40 minutes. 2 women in a white sedan with a county decal on the door. I met them at the west entrance and unlocked it. They were nice. Not brisk nice. Real nice. One had brought a bottle of water and a granola bar in her jacket pocket, like she'd made this drive before. I walked them back to the atrium. She stood up when she saw them. She smoothed her cardigan down with both hands. "I'm sorry to be trouble," she said. The younger of the 2 put a hand on her arm, light, and said, "You're not trouble, honey. Let's get you somewhere warm." I watched them walk her out. She didn't look back at me, which I was glad about. I don't know why. I think if she'd looked back, I would have had to say something, and I didn't have anything. I locked the door behind them and stood there a minute with my hand on the push bar. The parking lot lights were on out past the sidewalk, big yellow pools, and I could see the sedan pull out and turn left toward the interstate. I finished the loop. Lower level, back corridors, delivery bays, everything the way it should be. Around 2 in the morning, I sat down at the desk in the security office and opened the shift log. I sat there with the pen for a while. There's a whole section on the incident report form for describing the individual, the interaction, the disposition. I didn't want any of it in there. I felt like once I wrote down 22 years and Bailey Street and Ruth's son doesn't want her there, it stopped belonging to her and started belonging to a filing cabinet. I wrote one line: guest found in atrium after closing, did not exit with crowd. Turned over to County Elder Services, 1:07 a.m. That was it. My supervisor read it the next morning and didn't ask. He almost never asked. I worked that mall another 2 years before they cut the overnight position in 2024. I did a lot of loops through that atrium. I never saw her again. Some nights I looked at that same bench without really meaning to. It was always empty. Somebody asked me once what the scariest thing was I ever ran into on the overnight, expecting me to say a break-in or a guy on something. I always tell them the same thing. It wasn't a guy on something. It was a woman, with her hands folded, telling me she had nowhere to go, in the voice you'd use to say, "It looks like rain."